everybody, and welcome back for another round of World Talks. My name's Don Arleth, and let's get started. Russia is weaponizing the deportation of Ukrainians through Georgia, according to Andrii Sybiha, Ukraine's foreign minister. The Ukrainians want them sent to the Russian border instead. Often, Ukrainian citizens deported from Russia lack the proper documentation, such as passports or ID cards, which would be required to allow them to travel home from Georgia. Ukraine's council is working double time in Georgia to facilitate and coordinate their return through Moldova. And now joining me here to discuss this issue and more is Mikhail Alexseev, political science professor at San Diego State University. Hello, Mikhail, and thank you so much for joining us on World Talks.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. Now, why do you think it is that Russia is deporting Ukrainians to Georgia? Russia and Ukraine normally hold prisoner exchanges along their shared border or the Belarus-Ukraine border. So why not just deport them there as well?
Well, it's a dark and devious act of what Russia calls non-linear war. And we see all sorts of things like that. Russia uses social media, Russia uses all kinds of disinformation campaigns. And this is actually, a very nasty move. I have done a lot of research on immigration attitudes in Russia in the first decade of the 2000s, a lot of opinion surveys, including in the North Caucasus. I have looked at a lot of opinion data across the European Union. I looked at patterns of anti-immigrant attitudes and behavior in the United States. And one thing that comes through, if you look carefully, it's not, say, economic grievances or ethnic racial animosities that drive specific, exclusionist, hard anti-immigrant attitudes, but the sense of what I call anarchy, that the government cannot control immigration. And that's why when you send somebody with indeterminate status who are criminals, and somehow they made it across the border, it aggravates that sense of insecurity. You can read more of it. I have a book with Cambridge University Press on that called Immigration Phobia and the Security Dilemma, Russia, Europe, and the United States. So that's one thing. Another thing is that it is, and it's, again, pernicious kind of act of this war. It almost raises the demonstration effect that Putin wants to generate with his relentless attacks on Ukraine. If you remember the Georgia election campaign, the most recent one, the Georgia Dream Party ran on those slogans showing posters with a destroyed Ukrainian city and a thriving Georgian city, and essentially asking, do you want Georgia to become like Ukraine? And even though Georgians don't have warm feelings generally about Russia, Russia occupies 20% of Georgian territory, but a lot of Georgians also don't want Georgia to be like Ukraine. And Russia is basically weaponizing with sending migrants that message. I think Europe should take note because it may be a precursor on how Russia would deal in leveraging its interests, not just in the former Soviet space, but beyond it.
Certainly an interesting take. Now, what about the Georgian government? I mean, because it does take two to tango here. Should the Georgian government maybe not accept these deportees? Would there, or do you think that the pressure that Moscow is exerting on that government, they simply give in?
Well, we know that in the Georgia Dream if you look at the social basis of support for them, a lot of it is hardline Georgian Orthodox Church, for instance, that for a long time had a relatively, strong anti-immigrant stance. So for Georgia Dream government, they may want to show kind of a tough restrictionist attitude to it. However, I do see reports that Ukraine is working with the Georgian government and some of these people are being moved to Ukraine.
Right. Now, what kind of legal nightmare does this pose for Ukrainian officials?
Yes, I mean, obviously, you have to navigate that system. If you look at the people whom Russia pushed over the border. A lot of them, indeed, they don't. It's a mix. It's not just that they are, for example, all people who were charged with criminal offenses in Russia serving sentences. It's people who, for instance, lived in Russia-occupied Ukrainian territories and refused to take Russian citizenship. And Russia punishes those people, criminalizes that, and then you can present it, repackage that as bad Ukrainians being sent, and you deal with them and do whatever you want with them, but they will cause problems for you. So that again, it's a very nasty way to weaponize migration. And by the way, even though the number of these people is rather small, we're talking about, the last reports I saw said maybe 80, 90 of those people. But one thing that my research showed, it doesn't take a lot of people. A minuscule number of Chinese migrants in the Russian Far East in the 90s and 2000s created very significant anti-migrant sentiments because they were associated with chaos and lack of control. And so that is why these moves are important, and I'm glad you're covering them.
Now, yeah, you mentioned that there was, just a few dozen cases so far, but what is the likelihood that this could escalate and, we could see more Ukrainians from those occupied territories being forced out, being deported, and sent to Georgia on a more massive basis?
That's an absolutely justifiable fear. And we have seen, for instance, how Russia operates. You may remember enticing migrants from, say, Africa, then moving them across Belarus and sending them, pushing them into Poland. And another thing that does, this kind of message that more can come, that also feeds into this immigration security dilemma mindset, because it does create that uncertainty that generates fear, that generates discontent. And for Putin, it would serve, and for the Russian leadership, it would serve that purpose of destabilizing neighboring countries and creating that kind of demonstration effect, that if you be too friendly to Ukraine, for instance, then look at what kind of nasty things may happen to you.
Right now, slightly changing the subject, Ukraine has proposed another negotiations with Russia, high level, as high as possible, so they say, potentially taking place next week. Why do you think that Ukraine would want to have another round of negotiations at this point, given that the previous two rounds essentially failed to provide any significant outcome?
Well, the crucial difference here is the change in the position of Donald Trump. Our president has basically pivoted from using predominantly carrots, positive inducements for Russia, putting pressure on Ukraine, realizing now that Putin is not budging, and authorized new shipments of weapons and talk of new sanctions on Russia. And so the backdrop to this is that, if Russia doesn't respond to that, if Russia doesn't agree to negotiate, then more will be coming. So for Zelensky, it's very important. I think he took this timing is very good because he is reminding the United States, and he's reminding others that Ukraine is willing to proceed with the peace process, but because of Russia's extraordinarily restrictive demands, and in essence denying Ukraine its sovereignty, the right to have its military the way it wants, the right to get assistance from other countries, then this is not going to go anywhere. So it's an important move. I don't believe much will happen as a result of it, but it keeps attention, keeps the spotlight on Russia, and keeps also the reminding world leaders how important it is to support Ukraine.
Right. Now, we've also seen the government shakeup in Kyiv during this week. the changing of the prime minister shifting to become Minister of Defense. So some really repositioning by Kyiv. Why do you think this was done? Do you think that primarily this was done to maybe align the administration to be, I don't know, more better able to deal with the United States potentially, or were there is some domestic concerns as well?
I believe the external factor is the predominant one. We have seen, as I mentioned, realignment of the Trump administration policy, and Ukraine shows that it's adapting to it, that it is appointing the kind of people who have dealt with the Trump administration successfully. The new prime minister, for example, was the one who signed the minerals deal. The former prime minister, now becoming the defense minister, showing the importance of the development of Ukraine's own capabilities, of the military-industrial complex development, cooperation on multiple fronts, economic and military, and Ukraine paying for a lot of things, or having NATO and EU pitching more support for Ukraine while getting access to American equipment and technology that Ukraine desperately needs. So it's that kind of realignment. If you think of it, it makes sense that Ukraine is putting the emphasis on those aspects.
All right, well, it's a very important time, and with that 50-day deadline looming beginning September, well, there's a lot still left to be seen. Mikhail Alexseev, a political science professor, at San Diego State University, thank you so much for joining us. It was great to see you again.
You're very welcome.
And that's all the time we have on this edition of World Talks. Thank you for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.